there, I'm Nneka Chiazor, your host, and I'm happy you're here. You're in good company today, a show about bringing out the good so that we can all become great together. Today's topic is about uniting America's sons and daughters, and it's at such an apt time. And joining us today to have this conversation are retired General Ron Lewis, my favorite general in the whole wide world.
Thank you.
Also joining us today is the President and CEO of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, Jonathan Zur. My favorite President and CEO of the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities.
So kind of you.
Very kind, very kind. And also joining us today is the President and CEO of the Black Chamber of Commerce, Blair Durham. My favorite President and CEO of the Black Chamber of Commerce, right? I'm not going to get in trouble with anybody today, that's for sure. Hi, thank you for coming. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for being a part of this wonderful conversation about uniting America's sons and daughters. Reflecting on the topic for today, a lot of things came to mind, right? There's so much going on in the world about us. There is the coronavirus, COVID-19, the untimely death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery at the hands of unfortunate police officers. There's also civil unrest, racial tension, and if you want to bring it closer to home in Virginia, there's the toppling of statues, people really hurting right now. It's a lot. It can be a lot to process. I wanted to get a sense from the three of you, a word that describes how you're feeling about the world about us right now. And I'll start, I guess, with Jonathan.
It's hard to put it into one word. I would say maybe overwhelmed and purposeful, if I can get two words.
Overwhelmed and purposeful. Okay. How about you, Ron?
Nneka, you would normally hear me say encouraged or optimistic, and I know deep down inside that I am, but right now I'm feeling torn. The attention's torn. The pandemic is it's a big deal. We're not done with that yet. We're at over 2 million cases, 113,000 dead, and moving forward towards 170,000 or so, and things recurring as we reopen. So we should be focused on that. We should be focused on. It's a big deal. And then at the same time, this is a pivotal moment. You laid it out. This is that time. This is that time in our lifetime that we really can make a difference. We've got the attention. This is different. I'm seeing who's out there protesting and demonstrating together. This is different. This is a real opportunity to have a real conversation. So I'm torn. A little bit of the military leader, apolitical side of me says, be apolitical and be quiet. And the other side says, it's your responsibility to step up and say something at this moment. So I'm a little torn, but I'll get stitched back together.
Okay. I'm coming back to those stitches. How about you, Blair?
Yeah, a little bit of what you two have just expressed. I am hurting, right, on one hand, but hopeful on the other. A lot of what we're seeing now highlights the need for the work that Black Brand has been engaged in since 2016. And so it's challenging to see violence and disparity come to light in this way. But I feel like we are poised now more than ever before to close these gaps. And so that makes me hopeful. I'm ready to continue doing the work.
Got it. So let me go back to Jonathan for a second, because you said overwhelmed and purposeful. And those are two different directions. How do you find purpose when you're overwhelmed? How do you do it?
Yeah, I think some of it comes from the recognition that there have been a lot of people who have been overwhelmed for a very long time, that the system and the structures that we've had have worked for some of us much more than others. And so I think the recognition of that for a lot of people can feel overwhelming. I think the magnitude of the number of issues that have been going on all at the same general period of time feels a bit overwhelming. So one of the things we talked about at the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities is that our normal reaction when there's a crisis like what we've seen would be to bring folks together, to educate, to engage in dialogue, to provide opportunities for learning and action planning and healing. And we can't do that in the same ways because of the pandemic. And so it requires us to think differently about how we do our work and how we engage in community. At the same time, it feels like this is a moment when those who have had blinders on have had them ripped off. And so that's the purposeful opportunity that I'm not sure we can get to a more equitable and just outcome as a society without some feelings of difficulty and strain and pain. And so that's where the purposeful side really comes in.
And so thank you, Jonathan, for raising a really good point, because you talk about, how do we get to a just society, right? How do we get to justice? But I think before we get there, how do we even define where we are as a country? Now, I know the military uses a term, common operational procedure or common operational picture.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Right? What is the common operational picture, Ron, that you see us in as a 3-star general who has retired from the military? Where do you see us in right now vis-a-vis what Jonathan has just shared?
Yeah. So interesting you bring up a military term. Common operational picture, first and foremost, is it's not common unless we all are speaking the same language. We're all seeing things the same way. In the military, the common operational picture is displayed inside of a command post. It generally shows the enemy situation, the friendly situation. It's got some boundaries. It's got some graphics. It's got a pictorial of the battlefield, the circumstances, the situation. Picture's worth 1,000 words. But in the military, we understand what those symbols mean. We understand what the boundaries mean, the tactical terms, because of our training, our doctrine, our values, our beliefs. So we're seeing it the same way, and it means the same. There's a common understanding of what that picture of the environment is telling you. I don't think that we see what's happening today commonly. I think that the symbols that are being seen out on the streets, on some sides, they're being seen as, wow, what a difference than 1992 or 1968 because of, look at the makeup, race, age. People are saying there's something not quite right? So that symbol is seen through a lens that says that purposeful, optimistic, hopeful, to use Blair's terms. There are others that see the symbol and see this is anarchy. This is an opportunity to make a political statement right now. And let's use this to divide us even further. Let's militarize. Let's blame the liberals. Let's say this is a sign of weakness. So I think that the symbols that we're seeing out there are not being commonly seen. Where you sit defines where you stand sometimes, that kind of thing. And I think we can do that. So how do you make it more common? Through the discussions and conversations that Jonathan mentioned, through the ability to say, I don't really quite understand, but I'll try. Let me listen and try to put myself inside of your shoes, and then we can get towards a more common understanding of what we're seeing and what's behind the issues. It's not just the killing of George Floyd. This is much bigger. It's much more systematic, and we have an opportunity to make a big difference because of it.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. And I like, the way you talked about, let's understand how it is to be in someone else's shoes. I'd like to hear from you, Blair. What's it like to be in your heels, right? Because a lot of the narrative that we have out there has offered the male perspective. What are your thoughts? What's it like?
It's interesting in these times, right? And to go back to the piece about commonality, I think everyone is wanting to do something. And so on a daily basis, people are reaching out at every level to say, how can we either connect with the chamber, or how can we leverage your programming, or how can we find out about more Black-owned businesses? How can we create a new coalition? And so that's taxing, being pulled in the different directions. But it's exciting to know that, again, we have something that is in a position to help people. For example, working with the small business community in these times, helping them to access the different programs that exist, EIDL, PPP, PUA, etc. Having those resources at hand, it's great. I know we're making a difference. I know that we're having an impact because in very many cases, there aren't resources readily available for the community that we serve. And so simply by existing, we've been able to have an impact in these times. So, it's interesting. I can't say that we were anticipating what we're experiencing now, but I can say that I feel like we were prepared. So
you're prepared. And how about you, Jonathan? What's it like in your shoes?
I think for us at the Virginia Center for Inclusive Communities, it's been a period where folks have been reaching out nonstop. And that feels gratifying. And I think that speaks to relationships that our organization, our team, and our board have built over a long period of time. Candidly, it's also a little bit frustrating. These issues existed before the last few weeks. And the fact that there are so many institutions that 1 or 2 or 3 months ago were saying, sorry, the economy is a little bit shaky right now, I'm not sure what we're going to be able to do, are now turning around and saying, we need your support and services immediately, I think is both an opportunity, but also is a little bit frustrating and goes back to that overwhelming that I mentioned. As an individual, I think as a white person, I think it's a really important moment to reflect on my own identity and to consider what is the access to opportunity that I may have had simply by virtue of my race. It's a time to, I think, be self-reflective. I also think it's a time to do a lot of listening and do a lot of collaboration. So to not go out there and say, I have all the answers or I know exactly what to do, but really center those, in this case, folks in the Black or African American community who are most impacted by what's happening, both in terms of COVID-19, as well as in terms of the killing of Black men and women in recent weeks and months and years. And so I think it's a period of doing some listening rather than jumping into action.
I like it. Listening instead of jumping into action. So listening, in terms of listening, what are you all hearing from some of your colleagues, friends, stakeholders? Blair, I'll start with you. What are you hearing from members of the Black Chamber of Commerce?
It was interesting. I was just on a call with one of our partners this morning who happens to oversee a number of branches for a local bank. And he says that now, for the very first time, where before they were kind of told to leave their bags at the door, he is encouraging his staff, no, let's have the uncomfortable conversation. And so talking about race, it's not easy. Confronting that unconscious bias, unpacking the knapsack of white privilege, right? These are ideas that are coming to the fore in ways that are unprecedented. And so, I think it's a great thing. To echo something Jonathan said before, it's not likely that we're going to overcome these issues if we can't first confront them. I think it's time to conclude. Yeah.
But you raised a good point about privilege, and I know, Ron, I had watched a video that you were on recently, and I really felt for the young man who said, I don't feel privilege. I don't feel that I've experienced privilege. And I guess I'm coming to you now to say, what are the language tools? I guess languages, tools, communication vehicles that we can use to unite people at this time. Right?
Sure.
What is in your toolbox?
Sure. Nick, I think that's the right question. And being asked that, what from my white colleagues, I played golf with one of my leaders in the military the other day, just asking my opinion on the military culture and what can I do as we bring in new soldiers and how do we take advantage of this moment. I was asked my thoughts on the Confederate names and that kind of thing as well. Right? I mean, I was asked my opinion, but I think that what can be done, what tools should be used, how do you have that conversation? First off, I appreciate the honesty of that young man saying, hey, I don't feel like I own the sins of my father. I don't feel like I'm privileged. That's fine. I would just say that my recommendation to my colleagues, though, is right now is the time to listen, to try to empathize, to just say, I don't know what it's like to walk in your skin and experience everyday discrimination and have people walk to the other side of the street or be the only one in the room and the only one in the meeting. I don't know what that's like, but I'm willing to try to listen to that. Would be thought one, is the listening, active listening skills and tools. I don't think it's time to be defensive right now. I don't think it's time to prove that not everyone is a racist or things are really okay. We've had a black president. We've had the playing field's not level yet. It's not, and there are reasons for that. There are things that happened in 1619 through. I mean, there are reasons why, and we should just be honest enough and a big enough nation to say that, understand it, and then take the opportunity right now to be led towards some real change. I think there are things that can be done. I think that if you can walk in solidarity, you ought to do that. I think if you can have honest conversations at the table, if that's what you can do, I think you ought to do that. If you can support economically, if you can pass I mean, there are things that can be done right now, concrete action, support legislation, go vote. There are things that can be done, white, black, that we ought to be taking those steps right now. We ought to be courageous enough to take those steps. I would also like to be asked, if you were in charge, what strategy would you use? What are the kinds of pieces out there that we ought to be looking at from a leadership perspective? And then I would have a litany of strategy that I would propose going forward on actions that can be taken at the highest level and local leader level to help unite us.
And I really like your point about listening, right? Listening on both sides. And I know we often talk recently over the past few weeks in the context of white and black, but what about everybody else who's in between? And so, Jonathan, I'm going to pivot this to you. How should we go about further uniting America's sons and daughters, keeping in mind that in this America we're in right now, we have sons and daughters that are the offspring of interracial marriages, right? Mixed love. What is your guidance on that?
I think it's going to take an all of the above approach. And so I think that to say that we can move past talking about the unique, entangled, complex, and painful history of African Americans in the United States to talk about other groups, I think that's naive, and I think, frankly, that's offensive. And so we need to really spend time thinking about and unpacking and redressing the harms that have been done throughout this country's history and even before we were founded as a nation. At the same time, we need to recognize that the demographic trends tell us that we are seeing more and more diversity as a country and not less. So you named in terms of folks who identify as biracial and multiracial. We also have larger immigrant populations, Asian population, Latino, Hispanic population, Middle Eastern populations, et cetera. And so what that means is that our conversation needs to consider more perspectives, more identities, and not less. One of the things that's been most helpful to me in my own learning around this work was when a facilitator shared that when I hear something that doesn't sit comfortably with me, respond with wonder rather than judgment. And so I think we're in a culture right now where it's very quick to, we're very quick to judge others. How could you think that? What's wrong with you? We're very easy to change the channel or unfriend someone on social media if there's a perspective we disagree with. And that may still need to be an outcome for some, particularly if we're feeling unsafe or threatened. But I think insofar as we can respond with wonder and really stop and say, how is it that I see the world from this perspective and you see it from that perspective? How do we make meaning of that we're neighbors and see things and experience things so differently? We're colleagues and we see things and experience things so differently. I think that acknowledgement becomes an opportunity and a catalyst to move towards action. And so there are some things like that I think in terms of perspective taking are really important. I'm also really heartened by the fact that just came out the New York Times bestsellers lists for the last few weeks. And the top books are consistently about issues connected to race and being anti-racist. And so I think there's a hunger to learn. And my hope is that we don't stop with that, the learning and the listening, but we use that as a pathway towards collective action.
Thank you, Jonathan. And on that pathway to collective action, so Blair, let me pivot to you for a second, because I heard you have a 150-year plan. Is that right?
Yes, and I know it sounds ridiculous to think that we could even forecast 150 years out, but it is a part of a strategy to bring together really all of the institutions that impact this issue of economic equity. So we are partnering with the municipalities, we're partnering with the colleges and universities, we're partnering with other nonprofit organizations, we're partnering with small business leaders to build out this plan that addresses everything from people and values to education to policy, of course, the economics, and it's not just a plan, it's also a roadmap. And we really believe that by building out this kind of, again, coalition, we can have a much more succinct response. You look at what's happening now, I think it's great that that we're marching in solidarity, but I also think that we could have had a much more powerful, a much more meaningful response if we already had an agenda that was agreed upon, right? And so that's what the 150-year plan is all about. And of course, it's broken down into 5, 10, 15, and 20-year increments that are much more tangible. But ultimately, it's about unifying an agenda and moving the needle in terms of economic equity. That's long term. Can I tell you about a short term piece while we're talking?
I was going to say, we can come back 150 years from now and do this Zoom session again to find out how things go with the plan. Like,
yeah,
that
great grants, right? Short term though, we launched an app about 1.5 years ago, the Black Brand app. It is a platform for Black-owned businesses. One email that we've been getting consistently over the last 2 weeks is, how can I find them? And so we put this together as a way to help folks locate Black businesses of every variety. So restaurants, doctors, car detailing, whatever it is that you're looking for. And so there's a serious campaign underway now to find even more businesses ourselves. So we want to add 250 businesses to that app by the end of this month. And we're excited that that's going to happen because there's an interest and there's a need to do so. So short term, long term, there it is.
Okay, so short term, download the app on Black Brand's website. Long term, you have a 150-year plan that we're going to come back 150 years from 2020. Yes. I don't even know the math on that one. I'm not going to try right now.
2170.
Oh wow.
2170. The app is available on Apple and Android. So you can get that on your phone, free application. There's discounts on there, turn-by-turn directions, the whole 9 yards.
So I know we're almost at time. On the way to 2170, and I'll start with you, Jonathan. What do you think it would take to foster more open and inclusive conversations that could unite America's sons and daughters?
You know, Brian Stevenson is I think, prophetic voice in our time. He's the founder of the Equal Justice Initiative and the author of Just Mercy. And he talks about a critical foundational step in this as being proximity, that the way our society has been structured, it is easy to not be proximate to those who are different. That's true in terms of our neighborhoods. That's true in terms of how our schools are structured. That's true in terms of our houses of worship. And in many cases, it's true in terms of our workplaces, that even large corporations that have the presence of difference don't often have a lot of interaction. The C-suite looks different, for example, than other departments. And so proximity, I think, is a critical first step. And we need to be intentional about becoming proximate to those who have different lived experiences and perspectives. And once we have proximity, Stevenson says that we can start to build relationships that can lead to a sense of deep empathy, understanding one another, and then can work towards the ultimate goal of equity and justice. But I think what really is a foundational step is for each of us to look around to see who is our neighbor and to try to build relationships across lines of difference. And when we do that with intention, we can start along that pathway.
Thank you.
Powerful.
Very powerful. Very powerful. Proximity to empathy, to equity, to a more perfect union. How about you, Ron?
I like that quite a bit. The relationship piece. The relationships don't exist without trust. Right. So I mean, that's what's got to be built. That's kind of what's missing right now, is that reciprocal respect and trust in our communities. I think that's got to be worked on. I think that we're going to get some police reform, which it's going to happen. I think that it's going to be important for our leader messaging to be clear when we take steps. Our leader messaging. I heard you. No justice, no peace. The 4 officers were arrested, the 3 involved in Georgia were arrested. We will make sure, I'm going to track that as a leader, and I will make sure that there is justice. We heard you. Black lives matter. Not only Black lives, but Black livelihood matters. So I'm going to, as a leader, bring in commissions and look at those root causes, underlying causes, and we're going to put something in place in this moment to get at the economic disparity, the educational disparity, the legislation that's required to try to kind of close this gap. I think our leader messaging is critical. We first do no harm, so nothing out there that is more divisive and more fuel on the fire at this moment, but more positive. We're going to get this done, and we're going to take advantage of this opportunity. So trust inside that relationship, I think, Jonathan, is critical.
Trust. And Blair, I know that Black lives matter, and we know that all lives matter. What is your one recommendation on how we can get to a more perfect union?
Wow. Big question.
How about one word?
One word. I mean, for me, it's a deeply spiritual premise. It is why I am not engaged on the front lines, as it were. I don't want to incite violence inside myself or others. And so I think it's I think it's a personal matter. I have to say that. Yeah.
It's a personal matter. All right.
It is.
And I'll say this, speaking as someone who, as an executive at Cox Communications, that the road we're taking right now is dialogue, right? We're having a lot of conversations with our employees. We're having conversations with our community leaders, and we're having conversations with the public about social justice. We've made our own humble contribution by committing $1 million to social justice initiatives at this time. And that is our path right now to a more perfect union. But with that, I know that we're at time. You guys are like the coolest kids on the block. I can talk to you forever.
Cool kid.
You're the cool ones. Thank you so much for joining us today. Retired General Ron Lewis,
Thanks,
Jonathan Zer with Virginia Center of Inclusive Communities, and Blair Durham with Black Brand and the Black Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, and to our viewers watching, thank you for joining us on In Good Company, a show about bringing out the good so we can all be great. Take care, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you.